Good morning, 165th Air Wing. Welcome to today's program. It's about anger, the gift that keeps on giving. Yesterday, you had quite a full day with your post deployment yellow ribbon reintegration training schedule. You learned about investment techniques, planning for the future, keeping communication going. You had yoga and eye rest. You looked at post deployment stress with a good chaplain. You learned about TRICARE Humana. You learned about positive parenting and discipline. And last but not least, intimate communication with Dr. Marilyn Volker. Today, there are three programs, and you're doing understanding and reducing anger. Couples or singles are working with a good chaplain on my brain and your brain, a couple's guide to each other. And some people are doing iRest with Miss Emily Hain. So, welcome to Anger, the gift that keeps on giving. This is your facilitator, Dr. Margarita Gurri, and I'm coming to you not live, but through video because I'm in Boston today and I'm sorry to miss you, but I did want to let you know that you're always in my thoughts. So let's look at anger, especially post deployment. For whatever reason, anger seems to be the default. Military families thrive on that. And in some ways, it's adaptive because instead of being upset um, and depressed, anger is somehow gives us energy. It lets people know something's going on. It certainly is a conversation starter. So let's turn our attention to anger. Is this you here?
Oi, look what you just did to my car! What are you talking about? It just crashed into me! Oh, mate, I am right away! Move over, I can't get through! Just overtake them, you idiot! Hey, what do you think I'm trying to do? How did you not see me? Are you blind or something? Do you want to get out of the car and find out? Oi! Come on! Don't get eggy with me! Maybe you should get some lessons, yeah? Blimmin' girl driver!
So I just love this clip. I think it's really funny to look at road rage with kids because it just seems so silly, and yet, isn't that us some of the time? I don't know about you if anyone's driven in Miami, but driving in Miami, I encounter many times when I'm driving with my grandchildren and I'm going speed limit, people somehow think that I'm stopping them from their futures. So they honk, they tailgate, and they give me the Miami salute with that special finger. And of course, our instinct is to want to ram them or slow down or do something aggressive. And a while ago, I was experimenting with humor and how to get on top of anger and owning our power as human beings. And so I decided to just jump up and down with a really happy grin, waving into the rearview mirror. And you know what? About 65 to 75% of the time, I have the driver behind me wave kind of apologetically. I don't know, maybe they think I'm the minister's wife or their kindergarten teacher, who knows what, but for whatever reason, I know that our response to anger can really change everything in terms of the environment and we're in, whether it's a room or a table at the yellow ribbon or in your car. Anger arises in response to a mismatch between what we want and what we get. Anger also arises, according to my friend Dr. Ed Dunkelblau, when we want to give someone what we think they so dearly deserve, but we can't give them. That makes us angry and stressed. But anger, again, is a great motivator. It motivates us to take action, motivates other people to take action. It certainly starts conversations. In the United States of America, there's some research that 2 or 3 times a week on average, we lose our tempers. Now, I think that's a confusing statistic because we get angry all the time. There's nothing wrong with being angry, it's one of the basic emotions. But we're talking about losing your temper, not just the experience of it. And we all know that feeling doesn't always have to match the behavior. And we know that anger can be helpful or harmful, sometimes in equal combinations. So there's this man called Dr. David Matsumoto, and he explored the 7 basic human emotions. And he studied it in the Olympics. He was a coach for the wrestling team. And he discovered something really interesting, that even athletes who were blind from birth, who were never able to observe the different facial expressions that go with different feelings, had all the athletes had the same emotions. So take a moment now and think, what do you think are the top 7 basic universal emotions? Take a moment and you can pause this tape. All right. So most people in the yellow ribbon programs that I've gone to have said the first 3 are anger, happiness, and sadness. Those are the ones that pop up the most easily. And then there's surprise, disgust, and fear. Some of us don't think of surprise, disgust, and fear as emotions, but more as reactions, but indeed they are. And then think about the 7th one. What do you think is the worst possible emotion you can have, especially in a relationship? Whether it's a love partner or a work relationship, maybe even someone in the neighborhood or your faith community. Yep, the worst one is contempt. Contempt is like supersize with anger and disgust. We know that if a relationship gets to the point of contempt, it's almost impossible to drag yourself out of that, but you can. And if you do, it's like the strongest Japanese sword that's been heated up in the hottest forge so that it gets so strong that it's unbreakable. So contempt is not the kiss of death, but it certainly does require a whole lot of energy. Now, we're not talking about abusive relationships, that's beyond contempt. So today we're going to define anger and describe its triggers. We're going to explain the 5-stage anger episode model, and we're going to work on recognizing and practicing 3 anger management skills. And last but not least, I don't think any objective works unless we sit and tell our one of the partners in the room a plan we have to learn how to play with anger in a way that makes our lives better. First thing to think about is communication. Communication is key. If we're going to deal with anger, we have to acknowledge that most communication is nonverbal. It's not verbal. So whether we're speaking or not, it's all communication. So at first, post-deployment, communication can be awkward. And with every phase of the returning back to a new normal, um, there is there is opportunity for much awkwardness, as you have seen in the last few hours. I think it's important to be truthful to ourselves and to others, and sometimes really hard to admit that we're angry, or that we're frustrated or disgusted, or maybe that we were even wrong. Banish that thought. It's important to be respectful to ourselves and others and to share feelings. I think we have to be careful where we share them and with whom. Is some people aren't trustworthy, so you have to be careful who you share those feelings with. In the military, the top person you can share feelings with, other than loved ones, is the chaplain. Chaplains are not allowed to tell anyone what you tell them, except for God. And last I heard, God's not much of a gossip. So the chaplain is the safest first place to go. Then you have many of your mental health groups. You have the military. One source has lots of stuff. You have the military family life consultants, and you have the VA. You have all sorts of resources available. And I hope that yesterday you were able to jot down all of those resources, or at least where to get them. And when in doubt, Military One Source is the easy one-stop shop. And then arguments. Of course, we're going to have arguments. And one of the important things about dealing with anger is we have to accept that not only are we going to disagree, but we can make agreements that still work with those disagreements. So let's continue to look. So, what do you think some of the common anger triggers? Take a moment and talk about that. So I took a poll of post-deployment yellow ribbon groups, and here's what they came up with. Number one answer, hands down, was stupid. And some people said stupid people. Now, I know that seems harsh, but We all take turns at stupid. I know I've taken my turn today. Have you? If not, you will. We all take turns. It's like we have a stupid fairy on our shoulder helping us share that wealth. Next was unmet expectations. One of the things that triggers many of us is things don't happen the way that we expected they were going to happen, when and how. And that can be very frustrating and disappointing. So that's a trigger. People messing with your stuff. No one likes anyone messing with their stuff. Even at the yellow ribbon, you've got your stuff laid out at your place and someone touches it. Whoop! And we don't like that. Some people don't like anyone sitting on their bed. Some people don't like anyone touching their chair. Whatever it is, it seems to be one of the very common triggers. A major trigger is decision making snafus. You all in your family lives, whether you're married or single, whether you're a grandma, grandpa, aunt, uncle, mother, father, doesn't matter, community member, um, decision making changes throughout the cycles of deployment. You get ready to go and you begin to pull away from each other. You're gone and you're connecting remotely, and then you come back. And it's not so easy. There's a brief honeymoon period, and sometimes people skip that one. Um, And then you have to come back to looking at, okay, so when we were separated, the person at home started to do things differently. So that doesn't always jive well with someone who's been away and come back, said, I'm home. Let's just start off and go back to where we were. Well, even if we don't go away on deployment or life changes. So even just if we're in the same zip code, things change. So it's really important with the triggers to evaluate our decision making process. And last but not least is disrespect. Anyone disrespecting us. And sometimes we are disrespected by accident. People don't always understand our cultures, our backgrounds, our expectations. And so it's our job to somehow communicate, like Aretha Franklin, find out what it means to me. I find out what respect means to you. You find out what it means to me. And let's go beyond the golden rule. The golden rule is treat me as I would treat you, right? Nope. So I think let's go beyond the golden rule to is I'm going to treat you the way you want to be treated, whatever feels respectful to you, not as I would want to be treated. And that's one of the mistakes. So, since we're all rational human beings, allegedly, why is it that we get so triggered? Well, here's the culprit. What triggers anger is a little organ in the brain called the amygdala. It's the culprit. Yep. It's not our fault, is it now? Now we know who to blame. It's always fun to have someone to point to. Unfortunately, it's our brain. So, a long time ago, there were dinosaurs and cave people, and the dinosaur came up and the cave people didn't want to be eaten. Go figure. So they developed some responses, a shorthand. The amygdala is a shorthand to help people with the basic choices of survival. Some of us automatically fight, most of us take flight, and some of us freeze with fright. I know when I was in Alaska fishing with a friend, they were talking about black bears and brown bears. And one of them, if you pretend you're dead, they leave you alone. The other one, you pretend you're dead, you're eaten. I never remember which bear is which, but I think each situation might call for a different response. So we have to understand that maybe our basic response isn't always the most effective. Also, different kinds of training or experiences might change some of our basic instinctive response. Let's say I was born to be someone that goes into flight mode when something threatening happens. Well, maybe I've done martial arts training, maybe I've been in the military, maybe I'm an air wing guru. Whatever it is, maybe then I shift from flight as my primary mode of response to fight. Maybe I've been so traumatized that I then freeze with fright. So obviously we can shift. It's just important to know there's no one right or wrong way to respond. It's just instinct. And we just have to accept it and work with it. So now here's your caveman stress management. So the amygdala helps us with survival. Big dinosaurs about to come. It's not time to be making a lot of decisions or dealing with feelings. So the amygdala helps cut through everything. So there's no past, there's no future, It's just now. And it helps heighten all of our awareness with big, big emotions. And it's time to react. It speeds up our heart, our breathing, dilates our pupil. The blood goes from our brain to the gut and to the arms. And so we stop digesting, and arms or legs get more full of blood so we can book it. And that is your amygdala. So if you scratch right behind the ear, you'll know the next time you automatically instinctively get mad. Now, we know at Yellow Ribbon, we know in life now there are no dinosaurs, but certainly there is the enemy. But sometimes, even in everyday situations, let's go back to the road rage with those kids. There's no reason to get super angry, but we're wired to get angry, and that's what happens. One solution is to get away from the amygdala is to have a thought with some planning, whether it's breathing or smiling or thinking about something funny, it doesn't really matter. When we go beyond our amygdala, I call it peeking beyond the lizard brain. And I created that with my friend Dr. Rebecca Staten Reinstein. And she and I were creating this program about different kinds of communication. And we decided, let's take a look at what goes beyond the lizard brain. So there's a few basic types of communication. One is aggressive. As you can see, that's like fight. One is passive. You can see that that's like freeze with fright. Yes, you guessed it. Or even it could be flight. And then there's passive aggressive, everyone's favorite combination. If you've been talking to someone and you walk away and you shake your head like with a Scooby Doo shake and you go, "Ruh-oh," and you think, okay, why am I so angry or frustrated? Perhaps you've just been slimed by someone using a passive aggressive communication strategy to deal with their stress and their fear. And then there's assertive communication. That is the only healthy of these. And being assertive means that you're very direct, you're neutral in your communication, and you are measured. You don't attack, you don't blame, you don't complain, you don't explain. You get to the heart of the matter in a very straightforward way. It's hard for most of us to do that. And that's a whole nother workshop. So we'll talk about that some other time. With aggressive communication, the worst thing that happens is we end up hurting someone that is less powerful. It's a horrible feeling to be hurt, and none of us want to hurt, but it happens all the time that we're hurt or we hurt someone. The most important part of getting beyond the issue of anger and really understanding anger is stop being so judgmental with it. It is very hard to be aware if we're being judgmental. Just kind of notice where you are. I'm sure sometimes we're all aggressive communicators. Then there's the passive communicators that retreat. And here's a cute little cartoon, how to catch passive people. As you can see, it's pretty easy because they just sit there. And we've all lost our voices where we don't speak up or we speak through someone else. Um, and sometimes we gossip or we do something much later. There's different ways to be passive. And then there's passive aggressive. These are the professional victims. So sometimes it's really hard to be aggressive. And so we swallow our aggression and our anger. And what happens is it comes out kind of sideways and it's passive aggressive. So there's a little cartoon, I'm not passive aggressive. And then the little cartoon says, unlike some people I know, clearly being passive aggressive. So being indirect with anger and being sarcastic. Now, sarcasm can be a lot of fun, it can be a sport, as long as not a substitute for expressing our true feelings. So now, is this what happens when we're steering wrong with anger? Let's take a look. All right, so that's funny but not nice. I had in one of the groups that I was talking about anger with at a Yellow Ribbon event, one of the commanders' wives said, "Hey, I think we should sell those in the back of the room." And then she said, "And if we did that, we'd have enough money for all the family programs we could ever anticipate." And so I think that's kind of funny. Certainly tempting to do things like that, but it's important to be playful with it rather than plot revenge. That's too easy to do, especially for Miami drivers. So we ask the question, if anger is allegedly normal, when is it a problem? Well, it's a problem if it's more frequent than is comfortable for us or for other people in our lives, when it becomes intense, and when it lasts longer. The nurses at Shock Trauma Center at Johns Hopkins Hospital came up with something that I think helps define when anger is a problem. It's just one of many, but they call it the drink of water test. So imagine me holding a full cup of water without a sippy top, and it's all the way full. And if I can take it and drink water without spilling, choking, gagging, or throwing it at you, and then I can give it to you, and you can do all of the same without spilling a drop, then we can have a verbal discussion. Otherwise, it's not time for a verbal discussion. It's time instead for maybe a little time out. Let's think about it, or sense of humor, or something else. But nothing good comes from talking to someone who's too angry to be able to drink a glass of water. So now let's look at like a scenario. This is Mike and Jen. And here's the scenario that is not so uncommon. Mike used to take his son Bobby to Little League. While he was deployed, Jen found that she enjoyed taking Bobby to practice. Now that Mike's back, Jen wants to keep taking Bobby to practice. Mike becomes angry and they argue. Mike starts calling Jen derogatory names and throws a mug against the wall and storms out. So here's the situation with Mike, Jen, and Bobby. All right, so let's look at a model so we can understand that. So if we ask the question, why is Mike angry? So what were the triggers? Please share with your facilitator there. What are the triggers? Why is Mike so angry? So so you take a little break. So he's angry because his expectations weren't met. He was disappointed and frustrated. He's been gone. He came back. He wanted to go right back to his time with his boy, but instead his wife has taken over and she likes it, where before she didn't go. So he feels displaced. He feels frustrated and angry, and he's not able to really communicate what he really wants and needs. He's instead goes into the amygdala and becomes very aggressive, calling names and being a little violent. So those were the triggers. Now let's look at the issue of appraisal. What are uh, the the main difference is how we look at something. If we look at this as, Jen doing this on purpose, is she being hurtful? Is she disregarding? Or is it just part of creating a new normal? What happened? Why is this the deal? And so our appraisal makes all the difference. And depending on our experience, and we'll be talking about that next, we may look at things in a way that makes it easier for us to be insulted, angry, and hurt. Now, let's look at our experience. Our experience of a situation where we're facing anger is our physical symptoms. Again, the heart rate goes up, we can turn bright red. Sometimes, like in the cartoon, you see steam coming out of the ears. Um, Anger produced thinking patterns help us just dwell on an issue. I also think when we're very angry or we're very scared, and sometimes they go together, we distort events, we misperceive things, very common. And one of the things I've learned um, is that anger is almost never the first emotion. It's a secondary emotion. So probably his feelings are hurt. He's afraid that he's no longer important. He's afraid he can't figure things out or that he's not really welcome anymore. So what is Mike's experience? Talk about that amongst yourself a bit. And now we go to the issue of expression. Expression is the action or non action that we take when we're angry. We learn expressive patterns from our environment, from our, especially our early childhood. But we can learn expressive patterns from any culture we're in, where it's a particular work environment. I know I've worked with lots of police and fire. Their expression is very colorful with wonderful words in vocabularies that children aren't allowed to use. We even use hand gestures. Um, I knew one fire department that was in so much trouble for their foul language that they ended up creating a code and they go B4 and everyone laughed quack 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 because they knew what that was supposed to be. So they found a funny way to deal with their aggressive instinct and using language that was not allowed at the workplace. And so, what was Mike's expression? How did he express his anger? And talk amongst yourself about that. Yep, he exploded. He called names, he threw something, he did everything but really talk about what he really wanted. That brings us to outcome. Anger expressions changes our short and long-term outcomes. But I also think that if we think about the outcome before we talk about anything, let's say you get angry, and before you talk about anything, what do you want to happen in this conversation? So, Mike, what do you think Mike wanted? Take a moment to talk. Yep. What Mike really wanted was to be able to have some time alone with his boy. He wanted some father son bonding, and he wanted to claim his old life back. He sacrificed much for his country. He was away for however many months, and he's come back, and it seems like the ocean has filled his place in the sand. So now he and his family have to find a way to have a new normal. And the family member, Jen or whoever it is, also has to find a way to figure their way back. So, what do you think Mike's outcomes might be? What if he really was thinking, if he scratched his amygdala and thought, what do you think would make him happy? Come up with some solutions. Okay, so some of the solutions some groups have come up with are as follows. Maybe he can thank his wife. Thank you, Jen. I think it's so cool the way you've really embraced our son's sporting events. I really appreciate you doing that in my absence. And then he can also say, I have a favor to ask. And instead of blaming or accusing, it would be really important to me if I would be able to take our son alone, maybe just a few times, and then you can join, or we'll take turns, whatever. There's so many solutions. What solutions you come up with don't always have to be workable ones. You can say, well, then we'll take them out of the sporting events so we don't have this problem. Um, so if you're brainstorming, get ridiculous if you want, but then pare it down and choose wisely the outcomes that you think are workable. Here's where you can get a great handout on the five-step anger episode model on the Yellow Ribbon site. It's a great site, has lots of resources, lots of webinars. It's amazing. Um, so now let's look at three skill sets in terms of how we handle anger. There's avoidance and escape, and they can be very helpful. And there's lots of ways to avoid and escape things, and we'll talk about them. There's various problem-solving strategies, and then there's assertiveness. So let's take a look at these three anger management strategies. Avoidance versus escape. Direct avoidance allows you to plan around triggers. So you plan it and you figure out what are you going to do. So maybe one way of having a direct avoidance is as soon as you're angry, you think of something funny, or you think of your desired outcome, or you just laugh and scratch your amygdala, whatever it is, something that kicks you out of the mode of being angry. And then there's escape with a timeout and purposely removing yourself from the trigger. Say, all right, um, I'm going to. One of the things in many families is, would you like a cup of tea? And so you do a service for someone else, you get out of Dodge, you go wash your face, you go to the bathroom, you go outside, walk the dog, you do something to break the energy and not a blamey timeout. And I think that's very effective. And then re engagement is key. If you're going to have avoidance and escape be one of your effective strategies, you can't go away forever. You can go away for 10 seconds, 10 minutes, maybe even 10 hours, but not 10 days, 10 months, or 10 years. We have to be very careful in the choices that we make. Now, let's look at some suggestions on how to take a timeout. First, you recognize that you're becoming angry. Sometimes we know it, and sometimes we don't. And if we think about it, some people actually feel the blood going to their face, or they hear a funny noise in their ears, or they get twitchy. Whatever is your trigger, if you don't know it, turn to the person you came with that you know. They'll tell you your trigger. It's your tell. They know when you're angry even before you do sometimes. And then you excuse yourself and say when you'll be back. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Um, and then you head somewhere to relax or just to clear your head, maybe do some little thinking. You do something distracting or problem solving, and then you re-enter the situation all calm and ready to make a great solution. So now, here is a yellow ribbon site that you can go to for understanding and reducing anger. Let's look at the second skill, problem solving. We're going to overcome the tunnel vision of anger. When we get angry, it's very easy to just focus with a pinpoint energy on the thing that's bothering us. And sometimes we get repetitive and we get stuck on it. It's like a record that gets stuck. For some of you are young, records are those old-fashioned discs that go round and round. I know they're making a comeback. You keep track of and organize your thoughts. Some people journal, some people just talk to themselves. Um, don't worry, no one's going to think that you're off because everyone's talking to themselves now with these mobile headsets. Define the problem, the goal. So, what is the problem? So, for Jen and Mike, what is the problem? Talk amongst yourself. What is it? How do you define it? So, the problem is a reintegration problem. How are they going to grow as a family with Jen growing in her role and Mike coming back and growing in his? And what's the goal? Name some goals. Well, the goals obviously is happiness, peace, um, and to raise the son together in a joyful environment with good communication skills. We assess the importance. Is this problem really worth the effort? Well, this particular problem with Jen and Mike is, but maybe if Mike is so upset, maybe it's not worth the effort the first time. Maybe it is. I think it's something that everyone has to decide. And we can always ask if it's that important to you. Certainly you can go. And then you two sit down and explain to your son, Ben, that Daddy's going to go because they're looking forward to spending some time alone with you, and I wish you boys well. It's important that if there's both parents not going, that the other parent gives some sort of blessing and well wishing so the child doesn't feel guilty. And then you ask yourself, are your goals reasonable? Is it reasonable to be the only one to take this boy to sporting events? I don't know, but you have to ask. So let's look at another solution. So we're going to brainstorm solutions without edits. Just brainstorm, let it fly. And then evaluate each possible solution. What are the pros and what are the cons? What's workable, what's not? What do we like, what we don't like? And then we choose a solution or solutions and create a plan of action with little baby steps and bigger steps, starting from what are we going to do now and then into the near future. And then we're going to implement the plan and monitor the outcome. No solution works unless not only do you have a plan, but then you look at it. Did it work? What worked? It's like an after action review. What worked, what didn't work. And it's really important if you're going to do a group after action review with family emotions or love connections, is that first we say, what did we do right? And then what didn't go so well? And there's a variety of ways doing that, but it's really important to start with what went well. It kind of sets the tone to make it easier. If you start with a negative, shields go up and people don't listen as well. And then there's assertiveness. Assertive communication is neutral or pleasant. It's direct. It's simple. It's respectful. If you think about what it is you want and you can talk about it really straightforwardly, that is assertive communication. No blaming, no complaining, and certainly no whining or aggression. And then we look at our thoughts, desires, and feelings to help us figure out what we're going to do. And last but certainly not least, we look at facts. Now, some people are facts oriented when they make decisions or react, others are more into their gut instinct. And it's important to know who we're dealing with. Um, some people also need time to think about things before they respond, and some people can respond at the moment, depending on the people who are more into facts. Sometimes need time to think because they're checking and cross-checking their little matrix of all their facts. So you have to really think about who the person is you're talking to, so you can be assertive in a thoughtful way. So now let's look at some ideas on how to build um, a statement or a question that's assertive. First, you ask the person to talk. Is this a good time to talk? You don't say, may we talk? May I ask a question? You already just asked the question. May I ask the question is a question. So I think it's important to be more direct and not so passive. Is this a good time to talk? I'd like to talk. How about now? And if not, you can negotiate a time. Show that you're trying to take the other person's perspective, their point of view. I want to understand, or I don't understand. I'm mystified by why you're so angry. Please help me understand. And it's important again not to blame or accuse the other person of having some learning disability or whatever, or some mental slippage. Is it early Alzheimer's? No name calling. Ask for help. Help me understand. Sometimes we ask help of other people in our lives, whether it's the chaplain or a mental health professional or our neighbor, your mother, father, sister, brother. Talk to somebody and maybe get an idea of what would be a good way to respond. Especially when we're really angry, sometimes we don't know how we're coming across. One horrifying solution is for us to videotape ourselves with practicing a response. Is horrifying when you can see how you actually come across. But feedback such as that is very helpful. So I challenge thee, check that out. Next time you're really angry, practice some assertive statements or questions by videotaping yourself and let me know how that goes. And then last but not least, we listen and we're willing to compromise. And listening skills, again, another workshop, but you can tell someone is listening because they're nodding, they're maybe reflecting what you said, they're asking questions, and they're really trying not to just prove they're right, but to come up with a solution that works for everybody. Because after all, these are people we love. Now, here's one start. When this happens or happened, I feel or I felt. It's an I statement. It's much easier to start with our feelings than you. When you do this, I get mad. So that sounds kind of blamey. So it's important to start that way. Here's some other solutions. I would like, I feel. Um, when can we meet tomorrow? It's kind of like with a little girl. You don't say, would you like to get dressed? You say, would you like the blue dress or the pink dress? You make choices that are um, easier to avoid escaping. And they're actually more respectful in terms of problem solving. So here are some assertive statements that is in the form of a script. And again, you can get these slides on the yellow ribbon, and will also put it on a Kiwi Live. If you go to kiwilive.com and the keyword you enter is red shoe, you'll see your yellow ribbon event and you can download a PDF version of these slides. This also is going to be on YouTube as a link since I'm recording it. And I'll make sure that your on-site facilitator has that link so that you all can get to it if you want. So, so let's go back to that slide. So ask permission. Do you have a minute to talk? Well, I think that's a tricky question to ask it. Is this a good time to talk? I think it's better than do you have a minute? Everyone has a minute to talk, but they're just not in the mood or they're not up to it. I feel blank when, and you can fill it in. What emotion? I feel frustrated. I feel angry. I feel scared when I feel like I've been edged out and there's no room for me in our son's life. I would like some bonding time with our son alone. So uh, I would love to be able to take him by myself. Um, Acknowledge the other person's perspective. And if you can do it in a gracious way, Jen, I am so delighted that you love taking Ben there. That's way cool. But it's really important to me um, to be able to take him by myself at first. And then later on, after we get our bonding back and our mojo, uh, our brotherhood of men mojo back, then let's have you join and we'll do it a family thing, or we'll take turns, you and I taking him. So I understand that this may be difficult for you because, and then you state the reason. Um, because you got so used to taking our boy, and it was such a wonderful experience. And I really appreciate you working with me on this. It's super important to me. And you let the person understand why it's important. And here's where you can get the information. Now, let's practice some of our problem solving skills, shall we? All right. So here is an example of a typical problem. This particular one is a temper tantrum. Let's watch it, and then we'll do a little problem solving and practicing on dealing with triggers and anger skills.
Ah! Lleva la bomba! Lleva la bomba! Lleva la bomba!
All right, so I got this off of YouTube. It's a good one. And obviously, I'm not the best Catholic if I'm talking about condoms, but it's a great clip because it's got lots and lots of energy. So, talk amongst yourselves. What are the triggers? What could possibly have set this boy off? I give you a moment to talk. You can always pause the tape again. All right, so let me give you some of the answers that other yellow ribbon groups have given. We think that maybe this child didn't have breakfast, lunch, or dinner. Maybe the child had low blood sugar. Maybe the child has autism. My nephew has autism, and sometimes things set him off. He's an adult now, so he doesn't behave that way, but we don't know. Maybe his mother or father just deployed or just got back. We don't know what happened. Um, and so we have to give the benefit of the doubt. So those are the triggers. So, what are the choices that this dad can do and this boy can do and all the bystanders can do? What are some things we can do? So, first, we're going to try and understand it using the anger episode model. And we try and look at experience and expectations, etc. You can see by the look on everyone's face that they didn't know what to do, and there were many disapproving looks as well. And so, what do you do about it? And so this poor boy and this poor dad. So I've asked people, okay, what is the best possible responses that would help the dad? And what are the worst ones? So some of the worst ones that are my personal favorite is you go up to the dad and you tell him he's a terrible dad. You say that, curb your dog was one of my favorite responses because it's so very disrespectful. Remember, we're talking about bad responses right now, horrible, mean, that make things worse. Um, and then for the boy, you can give him the candy that he wanted. That's a horrible response. You can hit one or both of them. There's lots of things we can do that make it worse. Now, take a minute amongst yourself and figure out, okay, what can we do that might possibly add some compassion into this horrible environment that is so frustrating and embarrassing. So one of my favorite responses was um, was an Air Wing family member who said, "I would tell the father that this kid has great lungs, going to be a great umpire or opera singer." Someone else said, "This kid, look at him. He's got so much energy." And another one just showing compassion. They eventually grow up. Um, and he's a cute kid or whatever. I mean, so you can think about things to do. You can just do a knowing nod, like, I'm with you. The important part is if we're going to be part of a solution, if we don't get triggered by this, we can actually help someone else dealing with their trigger or a loved one's trigger. And I think it's important to sometimes be helpful to other people. In terms of the boy, one of my favorite responses is um, um, someone said, get down on the floor and pretend to have a temper tantrum too. It'll surprise the kid. It's actually called prescribing the symptom in a way. So not only are you doing a temper tantrum, but you can also tell the kid a little harder, a little faster, a little louder, and maybe the kid then is now doing your bidding, and so you've gained some control. So there's all sorts of ways to handle it. The main way to think about it is to keep your head, not react, and not add any negative energy or violence. At the yellow ribbon, there's always people say, beat them. And I always ask who, and they say both. So the issue is, what are you going to do the next time you see someone triggered, other than pray and be grateful that it's not you this time? So we've looked at some objectives. We looked at defining anger and describing its triggers. We've looked at the five-stage anger episode model, and we've practiced using it a bit here and there. We've looked at recognizing and practicing three anger management skills. And finally, now I want you to turn to the person that you came with and share what's at least one thing you can do the next time you're angry or you see someone else that is angry, so that you can help things um, smooth over. You can help increase positive communication and invite more joy into this world. So turn to your partner now and share that. All right. And last but not least, one of my favorite quotes from The Wizard of Oz, it's Glinda, the Good Witch. You've always had the power, my dear. You just had to learn it for yourself. We all really know in the bottom line what we need to do with anger. It's just sometimes looking at models or talking about it helps remind us of concrete steps we can take to peek beyond the lizard brain and get into, cognitive responses that are grown up rather than upset. Because when we're upset, we're all 5 years old. We don't want it. It's not fair. And we get mad. So peeking beyond the lizard brain, scratch it, think about something funny, think about some plan, think about someone you love. Um, I know someone who thinks about chocolate. Whatever it takes, so that you can get beyond and use anger as that gift that keeps on giving. So here we are at the end, understanding and reducing anger. And now let's take a look at one final thing. I leave you with this. Remember to give the benefit of the doubt.
Pas t'arrêtes maintenant, c'est insupportable.
So sometimes it's easy to not give people the benefit of the doubt, and so we get very angry. So I leave you with this poster that some of the kids that I've worked with helped me create at the Yellow Ribbon events. Thanks for keeping America free. And as someone who came from a communist country, Cuba, I can't tell you how much I appreciate your sacrifice, and I'm very proud of you all. Thank you for keeping America free and strong. Be safe. I hope you make safe return to your homes and have a fun time playing with anger, with humor and grace. You take care. Bye. Okay.